Roman soldiers were paid in salt, not silver, not gold, salt. And here's what nobody's telling you. That salary you earn, the word literally comes from salarium, the salt rations given to Roman legions. But here's where it gets crazy. Pound for pound, salt was traded at the same value as gold across multiple civilizations. The same stuff sitting in your kitchen right now. Once sparked wars, built empires, and determined who lived and who died. Let me show you exactly what's really happening in one of history's most suppressed economic stories. Look, we've been lied to about value. We think gold, diamonds, oil, that's real wealth, right? But here's the key. Salt controlled human civilization for over 5,000 years in ways gold never could. Because here's what they don't teach you. You can't survive without salt. Your body literally shuts down. Your neurons stop firing. Your muscles stop contracting. 3 weeks without it, you're dead. Gold, beautiful, shiny, completely useless for keeping you alive. And ancient peoples knew this. They understood something we've forgotten. Scarcity plus necessity equals absolute power. Here's what nobody tells you. The civilizations that controlled salt didn't just get rich. They controlled life and death itself. Let me show you how deep this goes. In ancient China, around 2700 BCE, they weren't mining for gold. They were boiling seawater in massive pans, extracting salt crystals, and the emperors, they placed it under the strictest government monopoly in human history. Wars were fought, dynasties rose and fell, all over salt. Here's where it gets disturbing. In medieval Europe, the salt trade routes were more heavily guarded than gold shipments. Venice, yeah, the romantic city of canals, built its entire empire on salt. They weren't poets and artists first, they were salt dealers. And they became one of the wealthiest city-states in human history because of it. But here's the key detail they glossed over in your history class. The old salt roads across the Sahara, slabs of salt, were literally carried by camels and traded 1-to-1 with gold dust in sub-Saharan Africa. 1 pound of salt, 1 pound of gold, equal value. Let me show you something even crazier. In Ethiopia, they used bars of salt, called amole, as actual currency until the 20th century. Not backed by salt, not representing salt. Literally salt bars functioning as money. This wasn't some primitive barter system. This was sophisticated economics. Here's what nobody tells you about the American Revolution. It wasn't just about tea and taxes. The British controlled the salt supply to the colonies. And when war broke out, Washington's army nearly collapsed. Not from lack of gunpowder, but from lack of salt. They couldn't preserve food, couldn't cure meat. Soldiers were getting sick from sodium deficiency. The British knew this. They blockaded salt imports specifically to starve out the rebellion. This wasn't supposed to be discovered, but there are letters from colonial leaders desperately begging for salt supplies. They called it white gold, more valuable in that moment than actual military ammunition. Here's the key. Whoever controlled salt controlled empires. The Romans built roads specifically for salt transport. The Via Salaria, the Salt Road. Cities were founded at salt springs. In fact, dozens of European cities have Sal in their names. Salzburg, Salerno, because they were built on salt wealth. And Gandhi? His famous Salt March in 1930 wasn't symbolic. It was strategic economic warfare. The British had made it illegal for Indians to collect or sell their own salt. Salt that was literally evaporating on their own coastlines. They had to buy it from British monopolies at inflated prices. Gandhi walked 240 miles to the sea to make salt, and it helped bring down an empire. Let me show you exactly how the power structure worked. In France, the gabelle, the salt tax, was so oppressive that it sparked riots. People were executed for salt smuggling. Not gold smuggling, salt smuggling. Families were destroyed. Children went hungry because they couldn't afford to preserve their food for winter. Here's what they don't want you to understand. Taxes on salt filled royal treasuries more than almost any other source. It was the medieval equivalent of controlling oil. And just like oil today, those who controlled it wrote the rules of the game. The French Revolution? Yeah. Bread prices mattered. But that brutal salt tax, that was fuel on the fire. The gabelle was one of the first things revolutionaries abolished. Because here's the key. Salt wasn't a luxury. It was survival. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Why did salt lose its value? Not because we stopped needing it. We consume more salt now than ever in human history. No. It lost value because of technology. In the 1800s, salt mining became industrialized. Suddenly, what took weeks of labor could be done in hours. The scarcity disappeared. And when scarcity disappeared, so did the monopolies. So did the power structures. So did entire economic systems built over millennia. Here's what nobody tells you. This is the pattern. Value isn't inherent. It's created by scarcity plus necessity plus control. Gold, diamonds, same formula. Their value is maintained by controlling supply. Salt taught us that. Let me show you something they don't want public. Salt created the first global trade networks. Before the spice trade, before the Silk Roads were famous, there were salt routes connecting Africa, Europe, and Asia. Civilizations that never met face to face were connected economically through this one substance. Look, here's what this really means. Every time you sprinkle salt on your food, you're holding what was once the most valuable commodity on earth, something that determined whether nations rose or fell, whether families ate or starved, whether empires expanded or collapsed. We've been conditioned to see gold as the ultimate store of value. But here's the truth they don't teach. For most of human history, salt was more precious because it was more essential. You can't eat gold. You can't preserve your harvest with it. You can't survive without sodium. This wasn't supposed to be this simple. Value is a story we're told about scarcity and control. And once you see that pattern, you start questioning everything about what we call valuable today. That's the real secret, and now you know it.